Welcome. We appreciate everybody coming out on this Saturday afternoon. I'm Julie McConnell. I think I've met several of you and emailed with a lot of you, so nice to meet all of you in person. And again, appreciate you all being here. And especially thanks to our host, man back here. This is his facility. He graciously offered this space to us. He's actually officially opening March 23rd. But again, graciously offered the space. So thank you very much for your hospitality. We're appreciative. So you guys, you're all in for a real treat today. If you've not heard Vivek speak before, I assure you, you have a real treat ahead of you. So Vivek is a Cincinnati native, as you all know, went to Xavier High School, and then went on to Harvard for undergrad, and then went to Yale for law school. He has founded several multi-billion-dollar companies. He has authored several books as well. I see some of you have Woke Inc. that was published in 2021. He also wrote Nation of Victims that was published in 2022. And in his spare time, he has written a third book that's coming out later this year. So he's been quite busy. Most recently, he founded an investment management firm in Central Ohio called Strive. And quite recently made the choice to step away from Strive, to embark on this new journey to revive American excellence and really unify our country. And with that, he declared his candidacy for President of the United States. So with that, it's my honor to introduce Vivek Ramaswamy, your Cincinnati neighbor and friend.
It's good to see everybody here. We did the big formal event in the Sharonville Convention Center this morning, and now we're kind of keeping it informal, mostly with friends and extended friends and family, people who from different stages of my career, from tennis in Cincinnati to the Indian American Hindu community to people I've gone to school with. This is much more of an informal group that I think we can make more of a conversation. I wanted to just share with you, a couple of you were already there this morning and heard me say the same thing about why it is I'm doing this, right? Why am I taking this step? And you know, if I was mapping out my political career, if I was pursuing a career in politics, I would have done it very differently. But I'm not pursuing a career in politics. This is about driving a national revival at a moment when we're going through a national identity crisis. I think that we're still figuring out who we really are as a country. And when you have a black hole that runs as deep as ours does, right? When faith is gone, God is gone, family's gone, faith, patriotism, hard work, the things that used to ground our sense of identity, when these things disappear, you're really left with a vacuum in its wake. And when a vacuum runs that deep, that is when poison begins to fill the void. And so as much as my fellow Republican candidates, and even myself, much over the last 3 years, have complained about these secular cults, racial wokeism, climatism, COVIDism, gender ideology in schools, as much as we complain about these things, we haven't paused to ask why it is that we see the rise of these secular cults at the same time. And I think it comes down to that vacuum of purpose and meaning and identity. And I said it this morning, I didn't intend to plan to say this in my speech, but I said it anyway, so I'll say it again. I think people seem to take something away from it, was just the way I think about us in our current moment in our national life. People my age and younger, even some ways myself. We're like bats. We're like lost in some cavernous abyss, lost in the dark. Bats are blind. We can't see where we really are in that dark abyss, but we get a sense for where we are by sending out our signals, our echolocation, our sonar system. We send out a signal and it bounces off of one wall. It'll be faith in God. Okay, that tells me where I am. I can't see where I am, but I bounce off something that I know is real, is true, is grounded. Then I figure out where I am. Off my family, my parents, my mom and my dad and my family who brought me into this world.
Okay, that's a source of identity that tells me where I am. I'm a citizen of this nation that we call America. I'm an American citizen. That means something. I send that out, it bounces back and tells me where I am. Hard work, thank you, that I create something in the world. I'm proud of that. I worked hard to create something meaningful, whatever that is. Maybe it's a home that I built. Maybe it's a piece of machinery that I welded. Whatever it is, I send that signal. It comes back. It grounds my identity. That's how we figure out who we are. And when those things disappear, right? Faith is gone. God is gone. Family is gone or under attack. Becomes a 4-letter word in America. Being a citizen of a nation is gone. Saying the word America at Stanford University now teaches you as a word you're not supposed to say because it's a microaggression. When these things disappear, hard work is gone in favor of a new epidemic of laziness in America. When these things disappear, we send those signals out, but then nothing comes back. And then we're just left in the abyss and we have no idea where we are or where we're going. And it's like the story of, I learned at St. X. We read about it. I read the Bible for the first time in St. X. One of the good things that I took away from St. X was actually there was religious education that was part of it. Even though I'm Hindu, I took a lot away from 4 years of Catholic education. Actually, one of the people who convinced me to go to St. X was Uncle Shukla's son, who was a senior when I was a freshman. They taught the story of when the Israelites escaped from Pharaoh, and they're lost in the desert, but they haven't reached the promised land. And what do they say? They say they want to go back and be ruled by Pharaoh. Right? And so I think that we in the conservative movement complain a lot about the powers that be. I do this. That's what Woke Inc. is all about. The powers that be in America, the rise of the woke industrial complex, a merger of state power and corporate power. That's a form of modern fascism that's more powerful than either one alone. That's an important part of the story. We've got to see that threat with clear eyes. It's not Ronald Reagan's 1980 when it's just big government that threatens liberty in America. But we got to ask ourselves what it is that causes us as a culture, as individuals, to want to bend the knee. Because that trick only works so long as we have a culture that's actually willing to buy up what they're selling. And I think that's really the question we need to answer, right? If we can see the promised land, if we know where we're headed, then we don't want to go back and be ruled by somebody else. But if we've already left, we're free. We're free to go where we want, how we want, when we want. We can blame the Pharaoh all we want. But what we're really missing is a vision of where we're going, where we need to go as a people, as individuals, as a country, as a nation. And I think that, I didn't say this morning. I was joking around a little bit of a bad mood and talking about our identity crisis, but I'm actually really optimistic about where we're going. I don't think that we have to be some nation that's in some inevitable national decline. My second book, Nation of Victims, actually most of the book was about, are we Rome? Right? Are we in the fall of the Roman Empire? Or even worse, actually where I concluded, I was in a little bit of a bad mood when I wrote that book too. I said, maybe we're not Rome, maybe we're just Carthage. We should be so lucky as to be Rome, which lasted thousands of years depending on how you measured it. Maybe we're actually just Carthage. And maybe Sicily is Taiwan and China's on the other side of it. But actually, on the other side of that, here's what I actually believe. I don't think we're Rome, and I don't think we're Carthage. I think we're just a little young, going through our own version of adolescence, figuring out who we really are as a country. And I think we have a chance to be stronger on the other side of it. I think the path to conviction runs through doubt. And I have been through my version of doubt in the last several years. Doubt about what it means to be a citizen of this country. Doubt about what it means to be an individual, live in my own version of a dream. Doubt about what would be left for my children. Would they be able to still live the life that I've enjoyed, that my parents gave me? Are we even doing it the right way? I don't even know at times. But on the other side of doubt is conviction. And I think that is the new American dream. It is not just about green pieces of paper and the accumulation of paper money that we fetishize. It's about conviction in our purpose as citizens. It is about the unapologetic pursuit of excellence itself, whatever that means to you. It can be excellence as a capitalist, that's great, but excellence in whatever way is best for you. That really is the new American dream. And I think if we can revive that dream, founded on the basic principles that set this nation into motion, from merit to free speech and open debate, to self-governance over aristocracy, to the rule of law, to the belief that these are the ideals that led to the birth of the greatest nation on earth that still gives hope to the rest of the free world, not the Soviet Union in the last century, not communist China in this one. If we can revive those ideals, the exceptionalism of those ideals, then really I believe that nobody in the world, not a nation, not a corporation, no virus is going to defeat us. That is what this four-letter word of American exceptionalism is all about. And that is what we're going to need in order to defeat this cultural epidemic in America. And that is why I'm running for president of the United States, and I wanted to open it up to all of you to make this more of a informal conversation of friends and family than some speech, because I've been doing plenty of the latter. Let's open up and do something where I'll give you guys a little challenge for the next hour that we'll be together, which is to really speak without inhibition. I think that we live in a moment where there's a big gap between what we're willing to say in private and what we're willing to say in public. And I think the health of a body politic like America, our health is high when the gap between those things is small. And you know when we're not doing well when there's a big gap between what we're willing to say in public and what we're willing to say in private. I can't remember a time in my life where there was a bigger gap between what people would say behind closed doors and what we would say in public. But we're not going to just fix that by complaining about it. The one way to fix it is by start talking openly again. You know, fear is infectious. There's something about it. Fear is more infectious than COVID, actually. It spreads 360 degrees in all directions, not just the direction you're coughing. Okay, it's something about it's all encompassing. But I think courage can be contagious too. It just takes more people to demonstrate courage before it starts spreading. But once you do, courage will spread like wildfire just as fast as fear will. And that's one of the whole goals of this campaign, to start an epidemic of courage, a wildfire of courage raging across the American terrain. That's really what this cultural campaign is all about. And I think, I can't be sure about it, but I'm pretty darn sure about it, that what we're going to find on the other side of that is actually not only most of you, but your neighbors, your classmates, your teammates, your colleagues. You might disagree on the small stuff, right? Whether corporate tax rates should be high or low, and what the level of regulation is of a particular industry. You might disagree on that stuff, but you will discover that most of us, we agree on the basic rules of the road, the basic principles that set this nation into motion. The only reason you think we don't is that you don't feel free to talk about it anymore. I think once we break down those conversational barriers, once we start talking openly again, once we express the part of our culture that's enshrined in the First Amendment, they call it the First Amendment for a reason, then we discover that the only reason we're divided is because somebody else wants us to be divided. Divide, conquer, more profit and power for the ruling party and ruling class in this country. And I think we have it in our power to see our way through it. It's not going to be someone from on high that comes from on high to save us. I just said this to a small group about a half hour ago at the end of the last event. If you're waiting for, me or Trump or DeSantis or somebody else to come from on high and save us, that ain't happening. Right. Nobody's coming from on high to save us. If we're going to be saved, it's going to be because we save ourselves. So that starts today. Thank you. So stand up. speak loudly, speak without fear, and let's get this rolling. My old classmate and friend.
It's good to see you. I'm Mark. I grew up here like 5 minutes from down the road. If you give me permission to speak freely, I'll talk the whole time, so I'm going to do my best to just keep it concise and short. I'm wondering if we can make diversity of faith part of this platform, because I think diversity of what you look like is irrelevant. What matters is what motivates you to get up in the morning and be your best. What is it that makes you pursue excellence? Is it for your kids? Is it your community? Is it your family? Is it God? Is it Dharma? Are you Jew? Are you Muslim? Are you Christian? Are you Buddhist? Are you Sikh? Are you Baha'i? Are you Jain? Whatever you are, whatever it is that inspires you to greatness, that makes you American. Sorry, all right, that's my talk.
Yeah. Well, I haven't nominated my vice president yet. So I like that. I think we've lived in moments in our past where, there have been struggles about religious pluralism in America or whatever. I think those are mostly artificial. But let's just wake up to where we are today. God is a three-letter word, but it's become a four-letter word in America. I think that even a lot of Republicans are tentative. They dance around the topic. I think it's one of the great sources of identity that fill that vacuum. And Blaise Pascal, who, by the way, is a famous scientist and mathematician, so we'll check off his science, capital S science credentials right there. Blaise Pascal said it pretty well. You have a hole in your heart the size of God. If God doesn't fill it, something else is going to fill it instead. You see the dissolution of Christ. You see the rise of climate instead. Different C-letter God. So I think that part of what we see is our hunger to believe in something bigger than ourselves, yet not knowing what that something else ought to be. And so I think we live in this moment where there's an opportunity for a revival of faith in our country. I mean that in both senses. Faith in our country as in faith in America, but also the revival of faith in America. I think those two things go together. I think the revival of family goes hand in glove with that. In the Christian tradition, what do you say? You can't experience the love of God if you don't first experience the love of your family. And I think it's an awkward question that I got, but a good one. I was in Iowa the first week of the campaign. It takes a while to really, for a room to warm up and build trust. But how do you know when you really built trust in a room like this one? It's maybe a little bit bigger than this room, but not too much. We started with some of the basic policy pillar questions, but when do you really know you've built trust with that room? Then I got a question, near the very end where a guy stands up in the back and says, I like everything what you're saying, but this is a nation founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And how can you possibly, as a Hindu, be the guy who represents those values if we're a Judeo-Christian nation? I so appreciated that, right? Because I could just see from looking around in the room, everyone else is thinking that, but no one else is willing to actually say it. So it's not just the left, right? It's this idea that we're afraid to say in public the things that we actually think in our minds. So I was grateful to him for voicing what it was clear to me at least half the people in the room by that point in the conversation were thinking. And here's what I told him. I said, look, I think that it is a fact, just a historical fact, and one to be proud of, that America was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. It's actually one that is deeply enshrined in my upbringing as a Hindu as well, similar, if not the same principles, right? In the Christian tradition, you say that we're all equal in the eyes of God because we're made in the image of God. In the Hindu tradition, what do we say? We say that we're all equal because God resides in each of us, right? So you say it a different way, and maybe it's a slightly different emphasis, but it's pretty darn close to the same thing relative to the secular cults that have actually filled the void created in the moral vacuum, created in the absence of faith itself. And so I kind of made a political deal with that guy. We sort of laughed about it, but it was also serious, which is to say that, look, I will be an advocate for preserving not only religious liberty, but a revival of faith in our culture for you. Better than someone who wears the flag of Christianity on their sleeve, because ain't nobody going to accuse me of being a Christian nationalist. That's not going to happen. Not in a credible way. And so let me do this for you, because we're pretty much mostly on we're very much on the same team, on the same principles here. We can say this in a different way, but in a moment where, the thing I've found is actually the people who are deeply practicing Christians in this country are almost the ones who, and I don't blame them, but are almost afraid of talking about God outside of the confines of church, because you've been shouted down or whatever to say that that was Christian nationalist exclusionary or whatever. And the irony is it's not even about faith versus secularism anymore. If it were only that, it's actually traditional faith, time-tested religions, versus religions that have not withstood the test of time, and that's the definition of a cult. The modern cults of climate, racial wokeism, gender ideology, these are religious convictions, right? And you can only believe that, I did it this morning, I don't even want to go into dissecting that again. It's if you really want me to, in another question I can, it's a little tiring, but these are secular cults. But I think that that's actually what we need to wake up to in the discussion about the revival of religion in American life. It's not the people who are true ethical secularists in the tradition of Immanuel Kant or whatever that want to live a good life and are finding their way to know how. It's actually just the rise of new religions, but not religions, they're new cults that actually prey on the vacuum and the black hole of identity created in the wake of the loss of traditional faith and by the way, patriotism and national identity and family and hard work to go along with it. So for anyone, any Christians in the audience or whatever who believe in that national revival, that's the same political deal I'll make with every American, because let me do the work for you that even many people who are Christian politicians are unable to today. We'll come around.
Two questions. One kind of less and one maybe a little deeper. How is your campaign doing in getting on all the primary ballots across the states and territories? And then what's your take on the overuse of executive order, bureaucratic regulatory law? How would you deal with that?
Great question. So the campaign is off to a fantastic start for being less than 3 weeks in. We're blown away. So the ballot access stuff starts only later, but I think we're going to be in great shape on that. Only 3 candidates have even formally entered the race. The kind of thing where once we decided we had conviction in this, and this was just over Christmas this last year, so it's actually very recent, but if we're going to do it, let's just do it and get in there and get started. So we almost are building the plane as we're flying it. There is really, I think I'm fortunate to somehow, I've got to thank, I guess, for people landing on my doorstep who happen to be professionals at this, who were as eager to work on this as they have. So we have a major team operating out of Columbus, Ohio. Actually, the number one thing that we're looking at right now is not only how to make the debate stage, which I'm confident we'll do, but how to actually have a prominent spot on the debate stage. That's something that, actually, I'll just take this as an opportunity before I forget at the end. If you're in this room, you're here because I feel comfortable asking you for your actual help on this. And it's probably the number one metric that matters is the number of unique donors, not the absolute dollars. That may be a secondary variable. The most important one is the number of unique donors. So even if it's $5, even if it's $1, if it's more, that's great, but $5 or $1, if you guys go to, there's that QR code before you leave, or Vivek2024.com, not only can you do that, but if honestly each of you, this is not an easy ask, it sounds easier than it is, but if each of you actually took responsibility for getting 100 people to give $1 at that link, Vivek2024.com, I'm just doing the count in this room, that's a major leap forward. And the good news is we're already getting that every day, but if each of you can take that on, that would be the number one most helpful thing I could ask of you. And the thing I also say is, forget about the who. You don't even have to know you're voting for me. Focus on the what and the why this year. What do we stand for and why do we stand for it? Next year is the question of who, actually. Pick the person who's going to be best suited to advance that agenda, but we, the Republican Party, sometimes skip the most important step. Define actually what you stand for, what we stand for, and why. And that's what I'm leading the way on, more than any candidate, and I will be absolutely doing it from the debate stage, is leading the way on defining that agenda. That's what you would actually be supporting. And so, campaign's doing great, but that's the number one metric, and then ballot access, all that becomes easier we hit that with flying colors. The real question, the second question was, how do you actually, remind me on the better bureaucratic reform, what's that? Yeah, bureaucratic reform and executive power, right? So I don't love the use of executive authority to create what Congress never authorized. That's become enough of a mainstay and habit, but here's where I am I actually believe the US president, given that status quo, can use executive power to unilaterally roll a lot of that back. I'll give you one example. So a lot of people in this country, I'm one of them, don't like affirmative action in America. It's a national cancer on our soul that not only is a form of anti-white and anti-Asian and anti-Indian racism, but it is also spawning a new form of anti-black racism in our country, where a black American who's actually gotten a job based on merit can no longer be seen as an equal because you don't know for sure. But no one says that out loud, but that's exactly the attitude that you have. You teach young kids that just because you're black, you can't get ahead unless the government lifts you up. I will tell you, I have not been in a classroom or a conference room with a black classmate or colleague who wasn't every bit as innately capable of accomplishing what I have. I've never met a person of any skin color, including black skin, who can't accomplish and live what I've lived in the American dream, and yet that's what we're teaching the next generation of Americans. That is psychological slavery, and it's wrong. But people complain about this without realizing that it started with an executive order. Lyndon Johnson wrote an executive order 11246 that forced anyone who does business with the federal government, which about 20% of the US workforce is covered by this, has to adopt race-based quota systems. And you know who made it worse was Nixon, actually. Because Nixon was on a war against the unions, so he used that executive order to actually tell these unions that they were non-compliant with this, and they had to actually set goals and deadlines by which they achieved those systems, so it was a divide and conquer strategy for the unions. And you know what? Every president since then, including Donald Trump, could have taken a pen and crossed that executive order out. Now, I pushed the Trump administration on this, people in the policy arm of the White House. Why don't you do this? They said, well, this isn't a political hill we want to die on. It's a very touchy subject. I think that if you're doing it on the basis of principle, I think we should replace that executive order with one that says you cannot use racial quotas if you're in your hiring practices wanting to do business with the federal government. And so I think that, I think that shutting down agencies is another one. I'm a believer, with constitutional conviction, that you can shut down agencies in the federal government by executive action, possibly even by executive order. I've said I want to shut down the Department of Education. Why? Because I'm against education in America? No, thank you. Thank you for understanding that. A lot of people say, are you anti-education? No. I'm against the federal government being involved in local education. Because a lot of I'm judging from this audience, maybe you guys already know this. That's great. I'm happy about that because more people need to, which is, you complain about wokeism and gender ideology and critical race theory in the schools, and some of that's at the school board level, but actually, you're missing the real hidden part of this, which is some of those school board members are just responding to the economic incentives created by the federal government in Washington, D.C., that says in order to get this money, you have to adopt these one-sided ideologies. And then you see this worker shortage we've got in the country, right? Where you want to call a plumber, you want to call a welder, someone to fix something. Anybody in here had some trouble doing that in the last few years? Well, it's because we have a worker shortage. Why do you have the worker shortage? You get what you pay for. The Department of Education incentivizes, they subsidize a 4-year gender studies major in California without at all applying the same subsidy or aid to somebody who wants to be a welder or a carpenter or a plumber or a mechanic. So is it any surprise that people respond to those economic incentives? So anyway, back to that question though, I think you can do that by executive order, but I don't think it applies it in two directions. So I think it's a one-way ratchet. If you want to shut something down or fire employees, you absolutely can do that, but you can't spend more than Congress has actually allocated. So it's intended to be a one-way check. And the perversion of the system is they ignored the one-way check on the upward side to say I can take action to create something new and spend money and hire functions that didn't exist, even if Congress didn't give me permission. When in fact we're supposed to work the other way, which is to say that if you want to actually fire someone who works for you, you should absolutely be able to do that by taking executive action. But it's a one-way ratchet downward, not for creating it upward. So it's been inverted upside down. And thank you, man. I appreciate it. And so my CEO's understanding of the Constitution is actually a pretty simple one. If someone works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you. It means you work for them. And if I'm taking all this trouble to be the fool who puts myself in the White House, I'm not going to be working for that federal bureaucracy. That federal bureaucracy is going to be working for me. Thank you.
Well, I love how you pulled out commonalities of Christianity and Judaism. I love that you talked about purpose, theism. But what I don't understand is all of these, what are called secular cults.
Yeah, secular cult.
Most of those programs are purpose-driven programs. Now, they're not perfect, maybe in how they're being executed, but you do have the ability to pull commonalities. What in these programs would you do to protect the intent of purpose of what they're doing versus just trying to get right to fill up for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I said this morning too, is I think that sometimes certainly I get even too wrapped up in the cynical side of this, which is a top-down imposition, and it's a big problem in our country, and that's what heart of the ESG movement and everything else is all about. Those are the things I'm mostly focused on. But I think a lot of young Americans, when they're espousing something like what they think of as environmentalism in the form of the climate cult, as I call it, it still starts from an earnest place, right? It starts from a good place. It's just filling a vacuum in the heart of their soul. So, I'll just give you one example because we could have hours on this. But I think even I should do better about drawing distinctions between what it means to support the environment versus actually ignoring anything environmental unless it can be wrapped into the narrative of climate change. Clean air, clean water. And we say this in Ohio about what happened after in East Palestine just weeks ago. We're proud of having a country that has clean air, clean water, beautiful natural terrain, the tradition of Teddy Roosevelt-style conservatism of actually conserving that which is ours. And that we don't apologize for these things, we embrace them. But that doesn't mean someone gets a monopoly for spewing incorrect reality. It's not reality, it's an untruth about the existential threat posed to our planet by, are global surface temperatures going up? Sure. Are they going up because of certain man-made causes, including but not limited to carbon dioxide? Sure. Is there any evidence suggesting that's an existential threat, or that the best way to address that threat isn't actually by preparing ourselves through innovation to adapt to changing conditions as we always have for most of our humanity? That's a different claim than saying that somehow we're opposed to clean air and clean water. And so thank you for that encouragement to do what I preach at times, but want to also practice, which is find the kernel somewhere in there, the point they might have. Not the cynical version of it, but even young people in this country, and then to embrace actually a positive vision of who we actually want to be, because that's what dilutes the poison to irrelevance rather than just playing whack-a-mole one at a time. I'll go here because he had a question, and then back here.
I just want to say I'm so pleased that you've thrown your hat in the ring. I think you're bringing an important voice to the conversation. As much as I admire what Donald Trump did, I think one of the opportunities he missed was in Make America Great Again. He didn't refer to the greatness of the people. It was always the country, military, economic. And as de Tocqueville and Adams knew, the greatness of the company derives from the goodness of its people. And I think you're bringing the conversation to that point.
Thank you. Forget that. I appreciate you saying that. And I think I love about Tocqueville is, sometimes it takes somebody from an outside perspective to come see what's actually beautiful and hiding right in front of your plain eyes. So he did us that favor some 160 odd years ago. There's also something he said about us, though. Here's the thing about Trump, actually, is I know him well. He's a friend. I think he cares. He's misunderstood. He actually cares about national unity. He really does. I know him. He does. Now, that's a different question from actually being able to deliver it. And to me, the defining question over the next year and a half is, do we want a national divorce? These aren't my words. This is percolating. Do we want a national divorce, or do we want a national revival? That is a choice. It's not going to happen to us. It's going to happen because we chose it, whichever it is. And my number one reason for running is I choose the national revival over the national divorce. And that comes from the greatness of our people. the other thing is I'll say about Tocqueville is he actually made a prediction about this national divorce point. He said a diverse, divided democracy is not supposed to stand more than a couple generations. It'll crumble under the weight of its own division. That's just what's supposed to happen. Unless, and he said a diverse, divided one, so it's a different one if it's an ethnically homogeneous, religiously homogeneous society. Those can stand, okay, because those have some commonality and some common bond. But America's different, right? We're not Italy here. Georgia Maloney, she's got her challenges over there, but say what you will, there's a common culture, common language, common tradition. Here, we're a diverse, polyglot, divided group of people. We always have been since our founding. That's not supposed to work. It's supposed to crumble under the weight of its own division. National divorce is supposed to be the default outcome unless there are certain protected spaces where we can come together regardless of the fissures of identity politics or partisan politics, certain apolitical sanctuaries that bring us together across the domains of partisan politics. And that's actually one of the underappreciated roles of American capitalism. Because American capitalism, I often say, it is the best known system to mankind to lift people up from poverty, and that it is. But it is also more than that. It is actually a precondition for solidarity itself, where we come together, whether you're Christian or Muslim, whether you're black or white, whether you're gay or straight, whether you're Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter in the football stadiums of this country, in the baseball stadiums of this country, in the biotech labs of this country. And it's once we lose that we reach the beginning of the end. Because when the football stadiums and the basketball stadiums and the biotech labs themselves become politicized, then we lose that glue that actually binds us together. And that too is part of why we need to protect capitalism from political overreach. Not just to protect capitalism, but to protect the continued existence, politicization of the churches or religious institutions that we see. Those are sanctuaries too. We need to keep those sanctuaries alive and well. And that's where part of the solution, I'm running for president of the United States. I'm not going to be able to deliver it all. Actually, part of this is going to make sure the job that I'm doing in the federal government doesn't invade the sphere of where most of us actually live our lives. What you really need is you need to guard against the spread of politics into the workforce, into the markets, into the church, into the schools. And I think that too is equally part of the challenge that it's going to take to revive this great nation. Go to you.
Good afternoon. I have a statement then, what you said about national divorce.
Don't worry about it. We can if you project, we can still hear you.
Sure. What you said about national divorce, I would argue that has its basis in Karl Marx and Marx's dialectic. That's for something to consider for the people, not for you to address. What I really wanted you to address was the nation is built on something called the Constitution. There's only 17 jobs given to the national government. Everything else is reserved to the states and to the population, to the citizens. That's per the Constitution's 9th and 10th Amendment. We also have something called Article 6 versus Article 5. We have a lot of people arguing we need a convention of the states to take immoral people and make them moral. I'm not sure how to do that with writing a few pages when we have thousands of pages written in a week. And I don't see anybody turning moral from an immoral person. But we have Article 6, which is nullification. A great example of how nullification could be used is this past month. Our governor, Governor DeWine, decided that we want to be the #1 state for 15-minute cities in the country. He could have easily said the exact same thing with a lot less syllables, saying, we're not going to do it in Ohio. We're going to nullify anything federally related regarding 15-minute cities. I'm wondering what your comments are.
So I'll address it and there's so much to say about the specifics of it, but the big picture I actually going to get I get this question from time to time when I've traveled the country, where am I on this Article 5 Convention of the States? People call me radical for saying this. I'm in favor of it. I think that it's unlikely that something that comes out of an Article 5 convention is actually going to pass muster with 75% or 3/4 of the state voting in favor of it. But why am I in favor of it? I think it starts a conversation that we're long overdue to have in this country about what are the actual principles that set the ball game into motion, right? It's not we sometimes fall prey to the 2023 Republican versus Democrat moment. It's not a 2023 Republican versus Democrat conversation. This is a 1776 moment. I think we live in a 1776, 1789 moment in this country. I hope if we wake up to that fact, then we don't get to an 1862 moment in this country. But I think that if we actually convened the equivalent of a modern constitutional convention, that discussion and that process and the ritual of doing it alone, I think can be the beginning of a great awakening in America that is the best antidote to the Great Reset that otherwise is what's going to take us step by step in slow motion in plain eyes. And so, I think the spirit of your question is, should we be thinking big or should we be playing small ball? I favor playing big ball, not small ball. That's the kind of moment we're going to live in America right now. And I think if we're ambitious about grappling with the seismic questions rather than trying to shoehorn everything into the language of Republican versus Democratic politics, we'll then keep scratching our head and wondering why we have these fissures in the Republican Party and obsess over the who of Kevin McCarthy or somebody else or Ronna McDaniel or somebody else. These are boring questions. They don't matter. They're artificial if we don't actually understand the first thing about the American principles that we were trying to enshrine through our politics in the first place. So I actually think, to the extent you guys kind of get other candidates coming through here, I think it's something that every presidential candidate should probably answer is, where are they on the Article 5 Convention of the States? It's sort of brewing in the country, getting more and more states supporting it. For the reasons that I said, I'm actually in favor of it, so I'm glad you asked it. George.
Just a quick question. I think the best and most powerful thing you said so far is that 2023 is about the message, 2024 is about the who. And to that point, you've emphasized that it's real easy pickings to talk about overspending or what's going on with the green stuff. The American dream is the unifier. What is your definition of what that dream is and how do we keep it alive?
So I think that when we rallied, many of us did, behind the cry to make America great again, we did not just hunger for any one man. We hungered for the unapologetic pursuit of excellence. That is what it means to be American, okay? Our inner animal spirit, I sometimes think about, I'm a visual person, I think about the inner animal at the heart of the American soul, okay? It has been domesticated, it has been tamed, where we tell that animal to stand down. And then what does it do? It has leapt oceans now to lift up places like China. And their culture of Maoist victimhood has now leapt oceans in the other direction to hold us back. And so I think we need to untame that inner animal. Pursue excellence in all of its forms unapologetically. Excellence and merit in who gets into this country. Excellence and merit in who gets ahead in this country. Excellence and merit in who governs this country. Let it be the people who we actually elect to run the government who are the ones who run the government, rather than this permanent state managerial bureaucracy protected by civil service protections. Meritocracy in ideas. The best ideas win when no ideas are censored. So I think this unapologetic pursuit of excellence, that's what unites us as Americans. That is the new American dream in every sphere of our lives. And that's what we need to reawaken and remember. And I think that we fell into the trap at some point along the way. It was an accident where we thought the American dream was just about green pieces of paper. Right? And I think that in some ways that's the mistake that the left makes by saying that, if green pieces of paper are tied to your moral worth, then we need to take those green pieces of paper from these guys and give it to those guys. But actually, we remember that we're all just co-equal citizens, right? No matter how many green pieces of paper are in our bank account. Maybe some guys want a different car than this guy, but if that doesn't actually have any difference in say of how you get to express yourself as a citizen, what voice and stake you have in the society, then the civic duties that you experience and bear as a citizen are the same. Whether you're a kid of a billionaire or whether you're a kid of a single mother in the inner city, it doesn't matter. You each have the same civic duties. Well, I think that's a powerful vision of the American dream too, is it's grounded in a civic equality. And once we embrace this idea of duty, the revival of civic duty, that's kind of, for some conservatives, a bad word. It's not a bad word for me. I think that citizenship comes with duty. You have to have some skin in the game in order to play in the game. That's what our founding fathers envisioned as well. But if that's something that we're willing to embrace as a movement, then actually we unshackle ourselves from the psychological force that makes us want to apologize for excellence. See, we don't have to worry about it if some guy wins on the basketball court or in the classroom or in the system of free market capitalism, if we know we have the deep-seated sense of security that we're doing it against the foundation of moral equality and civic equality, and we actually live that. But ironically, it's that the inner psychology in us that says that, oh, no, we can't allow that because we never really had the true form of equality in the first place. That, I think, is the new American dream. The path from victimhood to excellence runs through the revival of duty. It runs through the revival of citizenship itself. And that's an important, I haven't talked about this much on the campaign trail, but I will. I think this is an important part of the American revival, is the revival of citizenship itself. That too has to be part of that new American dream. And I'll tell you this thing about the who. It doesn't, maybe it's not me, maybe it's somebody else, all right? This year, define the what and the why. What do we stand for? Why do we stand for it? All of the bickering in the Republican Party, it's just a symptom of the fact that the party doesn't even know what it stands for. It just goes through the motions. You know, and I think that, you know, I've called on Ronna McDaniel, who runs the Republican Party. I don't believe in upward failing, but we could preach about the other side, but it's look in your own backyard to start with, right? I said, release the debate stage criteria in terms of what placement is. You know, mum, silence. And why? Because they want to have the opportunity to play games later on. But this is the managerial class of the Republican Party, every bit as much of a problem as it is in the federal government. But if we go through the process of actually defining the agenda, who cares about the party apparatus? What we actually care about is what do we stand for and why. Next year can be about the who, and the support I'm asking for everybody today is a support for that vision. And I think that's actually what will leave not only the Republican Party better off, but I think the country better off on the other side of it. So thank you for asking that question, George. I'll go here and then back here. Here, and then we'll come to you.
Yep. I really appreciate the vision that you're laying out and the fact that you're willing to speak out the way you are and that you're challenging us to push back. So in that spirit, I have two very quick, well, one of them is very quick and easy, I hope, or it's meant to be. And the other one is a little bit more to challenge something you just said. First thing is, I think there's an elephant that's in the room for many of us, maybe not all, but I'd just like to hear what your position is on pro-life. So that's the first one, and should be pretty simple, one way or the other.
Yep.
The other thing is that you've been talking about the pursuit of excellence, which I certainly agree is an American foundational principle. But as your former classmate from St. X and I were talking earlier, he brought up a really good point, and it came to mind when you were talking about the need for excellence and merit. I think in studying the Constitution and our founders, as I had to do it for the last few years, one of the key principles that undergirded everything that they did was not as much excellence as it was virtue. I mean, we can be really good at doing something that is not right? I mean, we can be good at the Green New Deal. We can be good at...
I hear you. Oh yeah, I love this. Yep.
So the idea is that I'd really like to hear you talk more about virtue and excellence with respect to virtue as a founding principle of the United States.
Love it. Love that, actually.
And with that, the question I have for you is, what would you say is the role of government in the United States? So pro-life and the role of government.
There's three questions there, because I actually want to address virtue too. But I'll go quickly. The first one's easy. Elephant in the room, what Rory was going to say. So I'm unapologetically pro-life. I think I picked that up actually during my St. X years. I think that's not a hard question. I think the harder question for Republicans is, how do you walk the walk? Where it's easy to say that, but what do you do to foster adoption? What do you do to actually foster people women who are in a tough position
when it comes to childcare, et cetera. So I think it's easy to say the words. I think we got to be thoughtful about, maybe Social Security late in life, or maybe there's an ability to draw to be able to actually address childcare today that creates, like I said, the Department of Education creates the incentives for schools to act in a bad way. Well, I think we have to create the incentives for people to act in the right way as well. And then, I think that one of the things I found in my debates with the left on this issue is that I think most of them would agree if it weren't about an imbalance between men and women in the responsibilities that they bear for where you are on the pro-life position. So I've been giving some thought to this. I'm going to do something dangerous, which is to say something that I'm not sure I'm fully there on, but I think it's a pretty interesting idea. I think we should consider it. It's suggested to me by a friend, which is that, because I think if you get the intuitions of most people, like Clarence Thomas asked in the Dobbs case during his questioning, okay, say if there's a pregnant woman and she's assaulted, but then the fetus dies, should there be added liability for the person who actually committed the act? Nearly every American, wherever they are, if they weren't in the middle of an abortion debate, would say yes to that question. It just tracks a native instinct, right? There's life here, but it's different when it's framed as a women's rights versus men's authority kind of issue. So the idea a friend had for me, which I gotta admit I've given some serious thought to, is one of the things we could really do to put some teeth into the pro-life movement in this country is actually pass state-level legislation that says that, a woman who sees the baby out to term has an option to actually have the father be responsible for raising the child, including at his expense. And that would actually inculcate a culture of responsibility, not just amongst girls, but also amongst boys and men, in sharing that responsibility, that idea of civic duty evenly. So this is a relatively recent idea. I have to admit I'm still chewing on the practicality of it. But I think it's the kind of thing that, pro-life check the box. You gotta walk the walk a little bit here too. And so I think that's something that I think we don't do enough of in the conservative movement. Virtue. So this actually relates. It's not unrelated to the question I just answered. So I would say that capitalism would be the best system known to mankind to organize a society's affairs. Right now I would say it's the least worst system, but it would be the best system for organizing society's affairs if our wants actually match our needs. And the gap between our wants and our needs, what we want and what we actually need, that is this thing we call virtue. Okay? And I think that when you have sunlight between those two, that's what allows social media companies to algorithmically pick at that difference and then run a truck through a little bit of sunlight cracking in through the door. Yet Mark Zuckerberg, how did he found Facebook? It was actually the predecessor was hot or not, right? So his insight was not about technology, it was about human nature. That I can get you to click on something faster or slower that gives me an insight into your soul that is deeper than you have into your own. And that was the basis for multi-trillion-dollar companies built over the last 2 decades. And so I think that's why I don't call myself a libertarian anymore. I used to call myself a libertarian. That was a cool thing to do back in college. But I don't call myself a libertarian anymore because libertarians have nothing to say about what it is we do in this great state of nirvana we will have achieved when we get the state out of our hair. Well, great, we're all free, the government's out of our hair, what then? They don't really have much to say about that. And the reason I call myself a conservative is because I care about this thing we call virtue. How to actually live a good life, how to live the right life. These are deep questions that matter. I say excellence, I think I encompass that in my sense of what it means to be excellent, is to live a virtuous life, but maybe I should, our logo's a V actually, I'm seeing back there, so maybe we should double as virtue and weave that into this campaign too. And the last question was about the role of government. This actually dovetails right off of that, which is, so the Federalist Society actually said this really well, and I think back in 1983 when it was founded, but people didn't pay attention to the exact phrasing at that time, but now we live in a moment where it matters, where the purpose of the state was not to just, what they said, I think the purpose of the state is to preserve liberty, is actually what it said, which is slightly different than just assuming that the state is the only source of a threat to liberty. And so I think that even though that was the assumption during the Reagan era, during the Friedman era, now we live in a moment where actually the purpose of the state itself is to preserve liberty. And I think we could have a 4-hour discussion about what the implications of that are, but I think that I stand by that definition. What is the purpose of government? The purpose of government is to preserve liberty. That's what my answer to that question. Take a couple more. Before I'll take yours, and then I wanted to say before people have to leave or whatever, I just want to before I take a question, I want to ask everyone in this room, right? Back to George's question. This is about the what and the why. I've got my team here. Let me have my team raise their hand. Julie's here. If you're on my team, Cole is in the back. Trisha, you're not raising your hand. Raise my hand so everyone knows who they are. Trisha, Cole, Julie in the room. They're going to look at you right now when I ask this question. And then they'll come to you afterwards. The ask that I will make of everyone in this room is easier than the first ask I made. But if everyone in this room, if you want to support the what and the why, this agenda we're talking about, this is friends and friends of friends. That's what this group is, different than the big audience I spoke to today. If you will raise your hand, and I will have someone on my team, actually, they're looking at seeing who they come to afterwards. Can you take accountability for getting and being responsible for 10 people that you will get to give $1 to that link? If you could just raise your hand right now before people start leaving, we will look for you. That's not a small responsibility. Take 10 people that you'll get to do it. My team will look around. Thank you, I appreciate that's most people in this room. We'll come to you, just sign up afterwards. That will, even before March 31st, get our snowball continuing to roll and build. With that, I'll go to this next question.
I was an early Trump supporter. I supported him for his ideas and the policies that he was going to implement. I think that when he was president, he got played by the power uniparty. What would you do to protect yourself against them, to maintain the ideals and policies that you want to implement for the betterment of our country?
He was in a tough position because, and so I want to learn from those lessons, okay? When you try to drain the swamp fights back and the swamp tries to drain you. And in some measure it did, actually, because the conventional view is that a president can't actually fire employees who work for them because of these civil service protections on the books that Congress passed. 1974 Anti-Impoundment Prevention Act, which says that you actually have to spend money if Congress is allocated, even if you think that money can't, should not be spent. I think I take a constitutionally grounded view that the chief executive of this country actually runs that federal bureaucracy. And when an administrative actor, pick one, Merrick Garland, James Comey, whoever it is, reaches beyond their legal scope, you have exactly one correct answer for what you do then. You fire them. You fire the managerial industrial complex around them. You fire the legions of people under them. And when an agency becomes so toxic, it can't be reformed from above. You actually have to do something that a president of the United States has really never done, but I think legally and constitutionally is well grounded to do. You have to shut it down. And if it is performing an essential function, then fine, you build something new, skeletal from scratch, that's actually fit to purpose to take its place. And so I think that's, Reagan might have been the last one to do it. Yeah. Air traffic control. So alphabet soup. Let's take aim at the rest of the alphabet soup. That's what we're going to need to. That's what we're going to need to do, because we have this waterfall of political accountability. Otherwise, the three-part system of government that the Constitution set into motion, that actually kicks its political authority to an alphabet soup of FTC to SEC to EPA to FDA. It goes on and on. But then they kick it down to a new alphabet soup now of FB, GOOG, MSFT, AAPL. Right? That's alphabet soup in the private sector. So that's the alphabet soupization of political accountability in this country. And then they're now kicking it to the next layer down the chain, which is AI, which is to say that it's actually not even human beings. It's just artificial intelligence that actually determines what ideas do or don't actually merit entering the sphere of public debate. So it's this waterfall of political accountability in our country. But I think the good news is the Constitution, for as long as it exists, right? And that's one of the things I don't like about a national divorce. People forget this. We have a national divorce. That is definitionally the end of the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution applies to the union that it governs. But anyway, so long as the Constitution exists, I believe the Constitution empowers the US president to actually run the executive branch of the government. And I'm an outsider who is not beholden to the political process of getting me there. I'm taking one leap to get there, to do it as an outsider. And then at a certain point, you only get to be an outsider once, right? You pass the torch on to the next one. I think that should be a tradition in the Republican Party, actually. I think that the Republican Party can become a party of the outsider. It's the norm. It should be the norm of the Republican Party to nominate somebody who comes from outside the political system every 8 years to do what needs to be done to keep it fresh. Whoever that is, I just think that can actually be a litmus test for what the Republican Party's base norm is versus the Democratic Party, which will go for people who actually came from the uniparty system. I think that actually can be an opportunity for us. It's self-serving because, I fit that description this time, but I actually think it should be something that's just true for the next 50 years of our country's national history. And I think we'll be in a good place if we have one political party at least that's committed to defecting from uniparty status. Yeah.
Really impressed with everything you're saying. Really excited that I came here to listen to you. Just curious about your views on an international front, right? So you talk about the American dream, you talk about American revivalism, what we stand for and why. Can you apply that to the international view of America?
Sure. So I'll take this. I'll take one more, and then we'll stop holding everyone captive. Okay, let's take one. You're right here. Right. I'll take you, and then come over here, and then we'll wrap after that. I'll still be around. We can chat for a little bit. So, international view of America. So, a couple things I'll say about that. I think foreign policy is all about prioritization. I think that we have to prioritize the top threat to America, which is communist China. Full stop. I think if Thomas Jefferson were alive today, the Declaration of Independence that he would sign would be the Declaration of Independence from China. And as US President, that is the Declaration of Independence that I will sign. That is easier said than done. Thank you. It's not going to be easy because we've got addicted to cheap stuff. We got addicted to their fentanyl that crosses the southern border. We got addicted to TikTok, digital fentanyl. We got addicted to national debt, financial fentanyl. We're addicted in a very real sense to China. And this was part of a 50-year project in this country. But I think that we can, I said this morning at the Hamilton County Talk as well, we can make a sacrifice if we know what we are sacrificing for. That's this thing we call America, okay? And that's where this domestic cultural agenda, this domestic cultural revival, this question of national identity is deeply related to our foreign policy. They go hand in glove together because we can only project strength if we are actually strong. We can only be strong if we really know who we even are. And so it's not that I ignore, it's not that I ignore foreign policy, it's that I think it begins with fortitude at home. And fortitude at home begins with fortitude within each of us. Now, I think the second thing, the job of the US military, and I'm not kidding you, this will sound like I'm saying something obvious. What I'm about to say to you is actually controversial in the US defense establishment. But I think the number one job of the US military should be to protect Americans on American soil. Basic idea. I'm not making this up. That's actually a controversial idea. Because the way they'll say there's a distinction between law enforcement and military, the closer you get to America, the closer you get to dissolving that distinction. It's a bogus justification. So what does that mean? I think the number one threat on American soil right now is actually the existence of the Mexican drug cartels that are responsible for fentanyl that's actually killing 100,000 Americans a year and responsible for a homelessness crisis across this country. It's literally eroding the foundation of our country in plain sight, and we're doing literally nothing about it. I mean, we're just standing there watching this play out in plain sight, complaining. I met two parents this morning who lost their kids to fentanyl that almost certainly came across the southern border, which almost all of it does, and increasingly most of it coming by Chinese raw products that are used to create it. We're literally just watching it in slow motion erode not only the American culture, but like literally deaths, 6-figure deaths per year, and a homelessness crisis in nearly every major city in this country. Just go to downtown and you'll see it. I reject that passivity of just believing that we have to watch the inevitable passage of time and watch our fate encompass us and suffocate us while we're just standing there watching. I refuse to watch as a passive bystander. I think it is a legitimate use of U.S. military force to annihilate the cartels south of the border in Mexico, to call the Mexican president. Thank you. It's a failed narco state south of our own border, to call the president and say, listen up, this is Obrador now, he's going to be out of office by January 2025, but he has a hugs not bullets strategy towards the cartels. Say, listen, they're paid, right? The cartels have a slogan. They say silver or lead with respect to their own government. Well, they've used a lot of silver to buy up. So I said, look, they're your sugar daddy. You got a new daddy in town. You got a choice. We're going to help you for a fraction of what we spent in Ukraine to take these guys out. But if you don't, we're going to come in and do it for you. Drone strikes, airstrikes, special forces operations, one cycle, 6 months. If you can do it to ISIS in Syria on the other side of the world, if you do it to Bin Laden and Soleimani, we can certainly take it to the failed narco state south of our own border. That's why I'm on court. Last question. Thank you.
Do you support medical freedom? Would you roll back all the COVID restrictions? And last but not least, would you hold people like Fauci accountable and responsible for all of his lies?
So I think that accountability is key. Accountability is a precondition for justice. And I'll tell you the thing that makes me most mad. So stand for medical freedom, absolutely. In fact, I think one of the things, a lot of you are tennis fans in this room, I know, because I know you from growing up in the Cincinnati tennis community. You know, one of the laughable things right now is Novak Djokovic, the best tennis player in the world. Talk about the pursuit of excellence. He's an embodiment of excellence. Literally cannot play in the United States today because he's not vaccinated against COVID, even after the COVID pandemic has ended, and even after he's actually immune through natural immunity. And the funniest little twist in this plot is I personally watched him play in the US Open final in September of 2021, when we're actually at the peak of COVID in the United States. It sort of reflects the religiosity of this commitment. It has nothing to do with science. There's nothing scientific about saying that he could play in front of a stadium of 30,000 people, which I was in also in September of 2021, but that he can't enter the country to play now because of COVID, because he wasn't vaccinated. So I think part of this is calling out the religiosity of it that's disguised in the veneer of science. Capital S, scientism, which is different than science. Now, the question about accountability here. So I think accountability is a precondition for justice. Okay, it was real. Okay, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who died in the COVID-19 pandemic. Hell that was unleashed on the world from what we all knew was obvious at the time. I mean, just basic common sense. Okay, there's a bioterror lab in Wuhan where there's the origin of a pandemic that then spreads across the rest of the world when China's locking it down. But if you said that it came from that lab, I'm not making this up, literally 2 years ago, you would have had your social media account locked. They would have taken down what you said and you would have been labeled a racist. Actually, many people were. There's no greater way to suppress dissent than to call someone a racist. And yet, what do we know 2 years later? Lo and behold, the Biden Energy Department, after even other security agencies, slowly come out and say, well, guess what? It actually came from that lab in Wuhan. So I think there's two prongs to accountability. One is we need to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for its role in perpetuating this and lying and letting this spread even as they lock down their country while still allowing all international flights to proceed. I think the thing you weren't supposed to ask 2 years ago is whether it leaked from a lab. The thing you're not supposed to ask today is whether it was intentional. But I think there has to be accountability or else you can expect even worse in the future. And I don't think anybody's going to dispute when I say the world's biggest pandemic risks still start in China. That's just fact. That is actual science. If you want to look at actually the number of future coronaviruses that are circulating amongst even Chinese animals, let alone the bioterror labs, you can expect worse in the future if you don't hold them accountable. But we lack the standing to hold China accountable if we don't deliver accountability here at home first. There was the very form of research that resulted, gain-of-function research, that resulted in the origin of a global pandemic was banned in the United States. I'll give Obama's, I'll call, like I said, give him credit for that. That was under the Obama administration. He said, you can't do it. Anthony Fauci disagreed with that. He disagreed with it because, you know what? we say it on the Republican side, it's true on the Democrat side too. The people who you elect to run the government are not actually the people who ran the government. So Fauci decided that Obama was a passing inconvenience and decided that actually he was going to nonetheless fund research funneled through the EcoHealth Alliance to do through the back door what he could not do through the front door. And funded the very form of research that in Wuhan resulted in a global pandemic. In the name of preventing a global pandemic, actually contributed to creating one. And we can't hold China accountable if we don't hold breakage of law in the United States and people who break the law in the United States accountable as well. And so I just think that accountability is a precondition for justice. And I start from this, we'll sort of close with this, is not, I think we gotta be careful we gotta do the right thing and do it unapologetically, but do it not even with the spirit of vengeance and with the spirit of retribution, but the spirit of conviction in doing what is actually right. Okay, I think that is actually what we have to remember at every step of the way. And that we're united by those ideals. That is what it means to be American. I said it this morning, I'll say it again. We have different shades of melanin in this room. We have different religious beliefs in this room. We are diverse. So what? Who cares about our diversity if there's nothing greater that binds us together across that diversity? That is what makes us American. That is what it means to be American. E pluribus unum, from many one. That is the vision that won the American Revolution and reunited us after the Civil War and won us 2 world wars and the Cold War. That is the vision that still gives hope to this free world. And if we can revive that ideal over fractious group identity and even grievance, then nobody in the world is going to defeat us. That is what American exceptionalism is all about. And that is what we need to revive in order to save this great nation, not by me or anyone else doing it for you, but from us actually doing it together. Thank you all for your help and support. God bless our great country. God bless the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be here for next little bit. We'll talk about healthcare and any other issues people want to talk about. I'll be here. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Thank you.